Hey everybody, something a little bit different today. I had some comments going back and forth with some people on the Discord for the Send in Light Gun. And there's a game for the PlayStation 2 called Endgame. And we were trying to get the Infinity pedal to work with that. And there's some quirks with the Nuvi plugin that for that game, it was not allowing it to work. So, tried everything with the biped application that I could to try to get it recognized by the game, but it just wasn't happening. So I've decided to go ahead and replace the guts of this with an Arduino that can emulate a keyboard and mouse. So this will show up as just a regular keyboard or mouse input instead of having to run through the biped application. So we're gonna go ahead and do that today. Go ahead and rip this apart, see what's inside of it, and replace the circuit board in this with just an Arduino. So let's go ahead and get into it. So it looks like we've just got 4 screws here on the back. We'll take those out. Now this bottom plate should just pop right off, and it does. Nice, 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 nice. So we've got some springs here. Very good. So let's see, these are 2 longer springs that go on the outside, and then 2 shorter springs that go in these center holes there. We've got what looks like some weighted blocks that give this thing some heft, and then there's a way to take this back off. I'll take a look and see if I can figure that out. All right, so I finally got the back off. There's a couple things that are definitely tricky here. So I did go ahead and remove the weights. They're just glued in, I guess, from the factory. So I'll go ahead and put those back and hot glue them in. There's tabs here and here. You do not need to remove those. Those just hold down the side foot pedals. But there are tabs that come through on either side of the weight. One right there and another one right there. You will need to push those out. And then the big tricky piece is down here in these cavities. There's this little pin, and this is pushed in through this hole that holds the middle foot pedal in. So, and then there's these little tabs that lock that into place. So I use this fat screwdriver to push those tabs out of the way, and then took another little sharp tool that I was able to push and put outward pressure on that pin and wiggle these tabs until it was able to slide past them and slide out. So it definitely took a little bit of effort, but you have to do that on this side and this side. Slide those out of the way, and then it should drop off. And if you look at what comes off, then this is just the bottom of the middle pedal. Let's see if I can get this right. These are the 2 tabs that stick through near those weights that you have to push out of the way, and this will drop away. And these are the holes here that those pins go through that you have to push out of the way. And then once you get that out of the way, you'll have something that looks like that. So there's just a standard arcade micro switch under here, and then this is your middle pedal. So go ahead and take a look at this, and I'm gonna decide how I want to remove this and use the existing USB connection to plug up the Arduino and wire everything in. So we'll be back once I've got that figured out. So this is always the scariest part of doing any project like this. You take something that works perfectly well and start cutting away at wires. So as you saw in that picture, there was the circuit board. I just took some flush cutters and snipped off the wires that were connected where you see that white goo at the top there. And what it looks to me is that this red wire going to this pedal over here is the switched wire. This white wire going over to the pedal here is the switch wire for that pedal. And then the blue wire from here is the switched wire from the middle pedal. And then this black wire along with these pink wires is just the ground loop that ties them all together. So I'm going to do some tests with a multimeter just to verify that. But if we're all good, then white is just going to go into our Arduino left pedal input, blue will go into middle, and red will go into right. And then we'll just tie that black into the ground and then use the connectors here off of the USB connection to provide 5 volts ground and then the 2 communication wires for USB. So we'll get looking at that and then also try to design some type of mounting. I could just hot glue the Arduino in here in this space, but maybe try to do something fancier where I actually put it on a board that snaps in just like this factory one. So we'll be back in a second once I've tackled all that. Alright, so just an update here now that I've been working on it a little bit. I was hoping that I would be able to just hardwire in those wires for 5 volts ground and then transmit and receive into the pins on the Arduino. Turns out with these Pro Micros, that is not the case. The TX, RX pins are not directly connected to the USB, so you'd have to solder in either on the little tiny pads of the USB port or find another place to connect a wire. So what I've done is gone into my parts bin and found a micro USB cable and just cut it up. And then took that pigtail and connected everything with alligator clips for now. But what I'll do is I will just add that micro USB endpoint inside the case and then just plug it in via the micro USB connector. Probably put some hot glue on it or something to make it more permanent in there. But what I have found is on this cable, got the red, black, white, and green in the switch, red, black, white, and green, but in this cable, I've tested this and I've got it connected to my computer right now. The green wire from the pedal goes to the white wire on this pigtail, and then vice versa. The white wire from the pedal goes to the green wire on the pigtail. But I've proven that works. This is pretty small, so it will all still package nicely in the case. I'm going to go ahead and solder on some wire extensions and actually get this all soldered up and then figure out how I'm going to route all the wires and get this Pro Micro mounted inside there. Alright, so I've got some extension wires soldered on there exactly how I want. Now it's time to go ahead and get this thing connected to the USB pigtail. right, so here comes the moment of truth. We're going to plug this in and see if it shows up, gets power, and is properly recognized as a COM port. Nice, looks like we have it. Let's go ahead and see if I can lay this out a little bit better and figure out where we're putting things, and then go ahead and button it up. All right, so as I started to try to fit this thing in here and lay it out and see where it went, I realized that the shielding of the insulation around that micro USB pigtail was still too large for it to really fit where I wanted. So I started hacking on it a little bit more, and also realized that I had kind of mangled up the ground cable when I was removing the shielding. So I cut even more off and found that under all that was just 4 little pads with wires soldered to them. So I stripped it all down to just those pads, cut off some of the excess wire, and then didn't do the best solder job here, but it's working pretty well. Just soldered them directly onto the pads of that little USB adapter. I plugged it in, still works, so happy with it. Now I can actually try to lay this out and find out how I'm going to put it in here. All right, so I've got everything wired up, tested, and it is working. So I misspoke earlier. The blue wire you see in the top left there is actually the common ground wire. So that's going into ground. Then the black wire is the middle switch. I've wired that into A3, but I'm just using that as a digital input pin for this. And that's really the only reason I've wired it in there, is just that's where the wire comes out, so I wanted it onto a pin on that side. And then I've got the left pedal, which is that white wire, into digital input 2, and the red wire, which is the far right pedal, into digital input 3. And then in my Arduino code, I'm using those for the inputs. All right, so I 3D printed a little plate there in black. You can see behind it. So I just used the dimensions from the board that I pulled out of there, so the holes fit over the little post and snap in there with those clips. Once I was happy with that, went ahead and hot glued the Pro Micro down to that plate. Also put some hot glue over the USB port, because those things have a tendency to pull up on these boards here. So just added that for a little extra strength, as well as then insulating the connectors there for the wires going to that USB connection. Everything's working good. Got it plugged into the computer right now, and it's working appropriately. So I'm going to go ahead and button this thing back up and give it a test. All right, so now let's talk software setup. If you go to the link in the description to my GitHub page, you can download this zip file that contains all the files you'll need to get this set up and running. So we'll go ahead and extract this, and what you'll see in here, we've got an Arduino folder and then all of the other required files to run the FrankenPedal exe, which is just a command line application that allows you to remap the pedal bindings. So the first thing we need to do is take a look at Device Manager, and I've already got my pedal plugged in, but if you want to open and look at this COM and LPT port section, when you plug it in, you'll see a new COM port get added. I know that COM 9 is my pedal, so I'll make sure I remember that for COM 9. So go ahead and close that. The next thing I want to do is launch the Arduino IDE. So we'll launch that, and I've actually already got it open, but what you'll do is you'll open up this FrankenPedal.ino. So go ahead and open that. Under Tools, Board, you're going to want to select Arduino Leonardo. So that's the same drivers that are used on the Pro Micro. And then for your COM port, you'll want to select the one for your pedal, It may even show up already that it's a Arduino Leonardo, but if it doesn't, just remember the serial port from the device manager. So once you've got that set up, go ahead and click this verify button to make sure that it compiles. And once it's compiled, go ahead and click upload to flash the program to the pedal. And now it's done. With the default configuration after you flash this, the pedals are going to be just like the buttons on a mouse. The left pedal is left click, far right pedal, right click, middle pedal is middle button. But we're going to go ahead and use the FrankenPedal exe to rebind those. So go ahead and close out of Arduino. So in here, you'll see that there is a defaults.json file. We're going to go ahead and edit this. And what you'll see is there's already some base settings in here. But what I'm going to do is change these to match my desired configuration. So I know that the COM port that I'm using is COM9. I'm going to leave the baud rate as default. That's what the Arduino file flashes. And then for most of the games I play, I use the right mouse button. So I'm actually just going to map by default all of the pedals to RB, which is right mouse button. So I go ahead and save this and close it. So this is going to be my defaults file. Now if I open up PowerShell, I can run this FrankenPedal.exe once I'm inside that directory. I'm going to run it with the help option so you can see the command line properties here. So what you can do is, you can see here, these characters are reserved or mapped to LB, MB, or RB for the mouse clicks. If you use any other character, it's going to configure it to actually send a keyboard input. So I've got some examples here. Run FrankenPedal exe. You can give it the COM port and override that defaults file. You can give it a baud rate. Again, that overrides the defaults. And then -L, -M, and -R allow you to pass in the mappings. Otherwise, you can pass in just the -D flag, and you can omit the COM port, and it's just going to use the settings from that defaults.json. So if I go ahead and run this -D, you'll see binding successful, and I've just set my pedal to where all 3 buttons are going to send a right mouse click. And you can see that if I go down here, I get my context menu from the right mouse click. So that's all there is to it to getting this set up and running, and this will remember those settings across reboots, across unplugging and plugging it back in. It will remember this setting. So now with this, I showed you in a previous video how I've used the auto hotkey scripts to set up the biped application. With this, it's going to be a similar process, but I'm just going to run the FrankenPedal exe with whatever the bindings I want. So, for example, in Time Crisis 4, it's the right mouse button. So I'm just going to run FrankenPedal exe, and this is just the long form with -- defaults. I could also run this as -D for shorthand, and that would do the exact same thing. So this will map all 3 pedals to the right button. I have noticed you do have to use the long form of this auto hotkey run command where you actually tell it the working directory. So you have to set your working directory context to that FrankenPedal directory. And then I've also passed in the 3rd argument hide so that I don't see the little flash pop up from the command prompt when this executes. But so this will run prior to running Time Crisis 4, and set all my pedals to defaults, which in my case, because of the defaults.json, as I said, that's going to map all the pedals to the right button. But for a game like Time Crisis 5 that has dual pedals and actually it's mapped to button presses on the keyboard, you'll see here I'm running FrankenPedal EXE, but passing in the left foot pedal as the letter T. My middle pedal, I'm mapping to the middle mouse button, which is going to be this bypass screen button. And then my right mouse pedal, -R, is going to be the Y key. So T and Y are the left pedal and right pedal in this game, so I'm setting it up for those. And again, setting the directory context with hide. So that's all there is to it. The one nice thing with this is that in a game like Endgame, and I can demo this just by running the auto hotkey script, you'll see I'm using the defaults here. If I go ahead and run this, once the game starts, my pedal works perfectly for the hide functionality in the game. So that's it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. This is not the easiest procedure to follow, but hopefully if you decide to dive into this and do a modification, it'll work for you. The other thing is if you, get a actual Time Crisis pedal or some other DIY pedal solution and want to do this with a Pro Micro just so you have a little bit more control over it, over the software, over being able to remap the pedal bindings on the fly, you can go ahead and use this software to create your own FrankenPedal setup. It doesn't have to be based on the Infinity pedal. So I hope this was helpful. Hope this was interesting. Again, any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back shortly with some tutorials on Time Crisis Crisis Zone, as well as the DuckStation emulator for the PS1 games of the original Time Crisis and Time Crisis Project Titan. Thanks again.